welcome to 7:30 Queensland. I'm Matt Wordsworth. Shortly we'll speak to the former head of the Medical Association about the Patel decision. But first, in the space of 7 weeks, Queensland has been transformed. Laws that have not been seen in most Western democracies have been introduced in the so-called war on bikies. The man who penned them, Attorney General Jarrod, Bleijie, has been both criticised and applauded in a debate that split the legal fraternity and had civil rights campaigners up in arms. The head of the Independent Crime and Misconduct Commission then weighed in with an article praising the laws. It later emerged he was encouraged to speak out by the government. Mr. Bleijie joined me earlier in the studio. Attorney, CMC Commissioner Philip Nace says that the head of the government media unit, Lee Anderson, approached the CMC to ask them to do media interviews about bikies after speaking with you. What did you want the CMC to do?
Well, look, I've read a lot about this. I think what the CMC's role really has got to be is telling Queenslanders what the issues are. They're one of the top crime-fighting bodies. It's one of their objectives is to fight crime, pedophile rings, criminal motorcycle gangs, and one of their objectives is, of course, for that. So I think they're quite right and entitled and should be telling Queenslanders what is actually going on behind closed doors at the CMC.
Philip Nace described the approach as more like an approach to a department rather than an independent office. Anything sinister in that?
Well, no, it's not, because we've got the Independent Police Commissioner as well. Now, you would know, Matt, the Police Commissioner is very media savvy, and the police see their role is to make sure Queenslanders understand the issues of importance in terms of criminals and the operations that the police have. I don't think there's anything different.
But there is a law that says, the CMC Act says they must be independent at all times.
Oh, indeed, and I think absolutely they are.
Was there ever an intention for the CMC to come out like it did and praise the government's laws?
Well, the laws that we put in place were effectively requested by the CMC, so they had additional power. They have, for intelligence gathering power now using their star chambers. They were requested by the CMC. In fact, we were quite excited, the Premier and I, when we went down to the CMC weeks ago, many weeks ago. We were briefed by the CMC on the operations, and I've seen a side of the CMC that I'd never seen before, and I think that is great to get that out in the public domain, because they've got some great people working down there, the police officers at the CMC, the operations, the intelligence that they're gathering, and I think for Queenslanders to be better educated, I think it's quite right for the CMC to talk about the laws positively that they requested. They requested the laws, we gave that, the legislature gave them the power, and then they were telling Queenslanders how they were using them.
I'm interested in that timeline because the bikie brawl happened on September the 27th, which triggered these laws. On the Monday following it, September the 30th, Cabinet approved the laws. You didn't meet the CMC till October the 3rd.
Well, no, we had, you'll remember the Premier was on a trade mission in Japan at the time of the Broadbeach incident, and I think that was the line in the sand. But there had been work being done in my department in relation to toughening laws for the last 18 months. This government's been unapologetic in terms of toughening our law and order agenda. We went to the election with a strong agenda.
But the CMC didn't ask you what they wanted until October the 3rd.
No, there had been correspondence, though we had many correspondence over a period of time from the CMC with respect to it. I think what happened, though...
That's not what the Premier said. Just on radio on Wednesday, he did say that when you went down there, we asked the head of the CMC and the assistant commissioners what changes to the law they would like to see to allow them to go after the criminal gangs in partnership. So the CMC literally made a submission to the AG saying these are the laws they wanted, and guess what? We implemented the things they wanted. Indeed. But you'd already announced everything on the Monday of the Cabinet on September 30 before this meeting even happened.
No, that's not entirely right, because the laws that we put into the Parliament, that very week, Cabinet only approved those laws that week of the Parliament. There was certainly...
But you put out a press release on September the 30th, because I have it here, yeah, which outlines all of your laws.
Yes, that was a...
It says gathering in groups, attending specific locations, owning, operating, working in tattoo parlours, promoting or recruiting for their organisation. That's on September the 30th.
Yes.
And so what exactly did the CMC ask for?
Well, that doesn't include this intelligence gathering operations for the CMC.
So was that the only thing they asked for?
Well, indeed, because
that's not what the Premier kind of indicated.
Well, what became apparent when we met with the CMC was that they had a legislative prohibition. They had an issue with the legislation that they couldn't bring these people, this Broadbeach incidents, because most of them were charged with a fray, which attracted a one-year offence. Now, the CMC didn't have the legislative ability to bring those people in for Star Chamber hearings and intelligence gathering. We found that out at the meeting with the CMC.
What else, apart from the Star Chamber things, did they ask for?
Oh, look, there were technical amendments to the legislation. There's been further...
But all the major things, they didn't ask for that because you'd already announced them?
Well, no. Well, certainly with the major things, the prohibitions on gathering in public places, the CMC didn't ask necessarily for that because that's not the CMC's role.
But that's contrary to what the Premier just said on radio on Wednesday. So he said the CMC literally made a submission to the AG saying these are the laws they wanted, and guess what? We implemented the things that they wanted. So that's not correct, is it?
I think that you're reading a bit too much into that.
I'm reading exactly what the Premier said. That's what I'm reading.
I think what it more is a package of reforms, and part of the package of reforms was what the CMC
just think the Premier seems like he's gilding the lily a little bit when he's saying all of these laws are what the CMC wanted when they're in fact just what you guys wanted.
We briefed the CMC on what we were going to do. I would anticipate that the law enforcement, both the police and the CMC, would be encouraged with a package of reforms rather than doing things in isolation. I think that's one of the issues we've had with criminal gangs over the years, is governments have tackled these issues in isolation rather than a reform package. We wanted to go in hard, we wanted to go in fast, and we wanted to catch the criminal gangs off guard, which I think we've done that.
So if we accept that the only major law that the CMC asked for was the Star Chamber and the others had already been announced, do you see a problem with the head of an independent body like the CMC, Dr Ken Levy, then coming out in a highly politicised environment arguing that you're taking the strong action that is required? Do you see a problem with that?
No, I don't, because one of the major functions of the CMC, remember the Crime and Misconduct Commission, the Crime Commission of Queensland, is major crime, and they have to be equipped to be able to talk to Queenslanders about these issues. I don't think Mr Levy would agree with all our laws, and I think he said that in his...
Well, his front-page article said you were taking the strong action that is required. Certainly he didn't indicate anything he had a problem with.
What he was probably indicating is that there hasn't been this sort of strong package of reforms action for many, many years.
Has he indicated to you that he has a problem with any of the laws?
Well, look, I think it's been a healthy debate and democracy we've had in the last 8 weeks with these laws.
But has he indicated to you that he has any problem with the laws?
Well, he hasn't indicated to me personally that there's any personal objection.
Yet you had a meeting on October the 3rd and they made a submission after knowing what happened on September the 30th that you'd already announced.
The CMC asked for special powers. We've given them everything they asked for.
The CMC in 2008, in a submission to a federal parliamentary inquiry, said outlawing bikie gangs may or may not be effective, and the Australian Crime Commission said that they may not have a great impact. What's the evidence saying that you should have implemented them? What evidence did you rely on?
This has been on the national agenda for many, many years. The South Australians were first to outlaw gangs with their legislation, which was overturned by the High Court. New South Wales followed suit, Queensland followed suit. Now other jurisdictions, most jurisdictions have these types of legislation. What we've done is a package of reforms. We're unapologetic. It's tough. It's some of the toughest in the nation.
Yes, I understand. You've said that you don't apologise, and it is very tough. But what evidence did you rely upon that this is good policy?
Sometimes Queenslanders, all the evidence they need is 50 banditos going into a tourist destination cafe on a Friday night when innocent women and children and grandparents are trying to have a nice dinner out in a public domain, and 50 intimidating men come with their jackets on, their leather patches, and start a brawl. And then to make matters worse, go down and put a line out the front of the police station. That's enough for Queenslanders.
In 2009, when similar laws were being enacted by the Labor government, you were issuing a rallying cry for the freedom of association, which obviously this overturns. Why the change for you personally there?
So good with those laws in 2009. They actually haven't been used or effective. No organisation's been declared a criminal organisation.
No, I accept it's only been used once and it's stalled in the Supreme Court, but I'm just talking about your personal opinions here. You were very passionate about the freedom of association.
Well, we were in terms of the legislation and the ability for the legislation to work. I didn't think it was going to work at the time.
No, but just generally.
It's not working.
Generally, and the political as well. You said this bill is a knee-jerk reaction and a campaign to appear to be tough on organised crime following the bikie brawl at Sydney Airport.
But the difference
remarkable parallels there, aren't
there? The difference is these laws that we've passed with these three bills, the Vlad legislation, the Gangs Disruption Bill and the Tattoo Parlours Bill, are actually having groundbreaking effect on the ground. Queenslanders are seeing that work on the ground.
But you accept that it runs counter to the freedom of association that you were...
No, because those laws... No? No, because those laws were a different draft terminology in terms of who they were capturing. We are very specific who we're going after here. In fact, we have named some of these organisations. We've named them in the legislation.
You're saying that these laws don't affect the freedom of association?
We have said there'll be some
But
inconvenience.
They do,
there'll be some inconvenience for law-abiding citizens. I've made that point on many occasions.
No, but for the bikies, that affects their freedom of association.
Well, what about the freedom?
I'm just asking, just on the concept of freedom of association.
But I'm going to pick you on this. What about the freedom of people to go into a shopping district without the fear of being shot? What about the young children at the Gold Coast and Broadbeach? What about their rights, their freedoms to go and have a coffee with their grandparents, or tourists to come to Queensland without the fear and intimidation of 50...
freedom to enjoy
thugs,
happiness
50
and
thugs,
good security is...
50 thugs starting a brawl in the middle of a shopping and tourist district.
Oh, I don't debate that people deserve to be safe and secure, but what we're talking about is your argument about freedom of association. I'm simply talking about your own argument in 2009, and I'm trying to investigate why it's so different now, because you're so passionate then.
We have seen, since 2009, these criminal gangs come out a lot more from under their rocks. We've seen the public displays. We've had incidents. Remember the shooting at Robina. We've had shootings at the Sunshine Coast into a tattoo parlour in the last couple of years.
But the Sydney Airport bikie brawl ended up in someone dying.
What I'm saying is we have seen over the last few years these criminal gangs come out of their rocks more so since 2009.
You said that a government that tries to remove these freedoms and liberties is a government that is to be feared. The issue here should not be about the associations of individuals, it should be about the crimes committed.
And our laws target both the association and the crimes committed.
Well, the anti-consorting laws just simply
heavy penalties.
criminalise 3 people who meet together who may be members of the same association.
Correct, and I'm pleased to say, I'm pleased to say that the police have made their first 3 arrests under those new laws, with 3 suspected members associating together.
And just before I move on, just one more comment from your 2009 speech, where you said, "Nothing shows more contempt for the people of Queensland than when you have to chop and change your values for the political landscape of the day." How are you not being just as hypocritical as the Labor Party was then?
Because you have to be upfront with the people of Queensland, and we've been very upfront with the people of Queensland. Everything I said in 2009 is on the public record, and I accept that. What I'm saying now, though, is since 2009 to 2013, criminal gangs have prospered. They've prospered under a regime of former Labor Party soft inaction in governments. We're now saying enough's enough. We've drawn a line in the sand, and we're going after them.
And if I could briefly touch on the sex offender laws, you'll now decide if people stay in jail once the appeal process is exhausted. People saying that's against the separation of powers when you've got a politician deciding if people stay in jail.
Well, look, this is a tough one, because this was reluctant legislation. It was legislation of last resort. We have currently, under the dangerous prisoners legislation, we're talking about the worst of the worst. That's why we've taken the stance we have. In saying that, Matt, though, I've had good discussions with the Bar Association, and the Bar Association will be putting submissions to us that they think they may be able to come up with ways to strengthen the dangerous prisoners legislation. And if we can...
So you will no longer have the decision?
No, if we can, through the Bar Association, come up with ideas that they're currently working on, where they strengthen the dangerous prisoners legislation to make it harder for courts to release these people into the community, then that's a win for everyone, and that means we don't have to utilise... But
you'll retain the final say, is that what you're saying?
Well, what I'm trying to say is we want to try and do everything we can before we have to use that legislation. I'm working with the Bar Association. They think they may be able to come up with a better way to do under the dangerous prisoners legislation, and if they can, that's great. And we've said, I've had a couple of meetings with them already, and we said we'll certainly look at anything they want to give us.
OK, Attorney, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks, mate. Great to be here.
The Jarrod Patel saga has been a tortuous process, but now it appears to be over. Dr Patel has pleaded guilty to fraud over his medical registration, and prosecutors have dropped their remaining criminal charges. But what has Queensland got to show for this 8-year pursuit? To help answer that question, I was joined by Dr